The arrival and the encounter. The crisp hum of an electric engine filled the air as Olivia Adams' luxury EV sedan glided down the tree-lined avenue, leading to the prestigious Boulevard district. The neighborhood was a gleaming array of high-end boutiques, art galleries, and upscale restaurants that spoke to a world of opulence. Olivia, dressed in a pristine white pantsuit that exuded understated elegance, glanced at the evening sky through her sunroof. Shades of gold and amber streaked the horizon, signaling the approaching dusk. Her phone buzzed softly in the cup holder. A glance at the screen showed a reminder of the dinner reservation she'd made weeks ago. Olivia smirked. It wasn't every day she treated herself to such decadence, but tonight was special, a celebration of a significant milestone in her career. She had just secured a billion-dollar investment deal for her global nonprofit, Empower Forward, a foundation that funded education and technology initiatives for underprivileged communities worldwide. As she turned into the circular driveway of L'Amour Fine Dining, one of the district's crown jewels, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of anticipation. Known for its world-class cuisine and exclusivity, the restaurant catered to the elite, boasting a clientele list of celebrities, politicians, and CEOs. Olivia had selected it not for its reputation, but for its chef, a culinary artist who had risen from humble beginnings, much like herself. A valet in a sharply pressed uniform stepped forward, his demeanor professional but friendly. "Good evening, ma'am," he greeted, opening her door with practiced grace. "Welcome to L'Amour." "Thank you," Olivia replied warmly, stepping out. She handed him her keys and retrieved a small clutch from the passenger seat. As she walked toward the entrance, the faint click of her heels against the polished stone pathway echoed in the tranquil evening. The entrance to L'Amour was nothing short of a statement. A grand archway of glass and steel framed by cascading greenery invited patrons into a lobby bathed in soft ambient light. Olivia stepped inside, greeted by the faint aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with delicate hints of truffle oil. Behind the host podium stood a middle-aged man in a tailored suit. His silver hair was meticulously styled, and his name tag read Richard Davenport, manager. His posture radiated authority as he greeted an older couple with a charm that bordered on theatrical. When Olivia approached, Richard's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. The warm smile he had offered the previous guests was replaced with a cooler, more measured expression. His sharp eyes swept over her, lingering momentarily on her dark complexion. "Good evening," Olivia began, her tone polite. "I have a reservation under Adams." Richard's lips tightened. "Adams, you said?" He flipped through the pages of the reservation book, though Olivia noticed his fingers barely skimmed the entries. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name here. Are you certain it's for tonight?" "Yes, I'm certain," Olivia replied, maintaining her composure. "I made the reservation 3 weeks ago. Could you double-check?" Richard sighed, a practiced sound of feigned sympathy. "Unfortunately, we're fully booked this evening. Perhaps you'd like to try one of the cafes down the street." Olivia blinked, caught off guard by his dismissive tone. "Fully booked," she repeated, glancing over his shoulder into the main dining area. Several tables were unoccupied, their crisp white linens glowing under soft chandeliers. "Yes, ma'am," Richard said curtly. "As you can see, we're at capacity." Olivia's jaw tightened. She had faced her share of discrimination before, often cloaked in subtlety. But tonight, there was no mistaking Richard's intent. His tone, his body language, and the way he avoided meeting her gaze told her everything she needed to know. "I see," Olivia said finally, her voice calm but firm. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. "Would you mind if I spoke to the owner directly? I'd hate for this kind of treatment to tarnish L'Amour's reputation." Richard's expression flickered, a brief moment of uncertainty before his arrogance reasserted itself. "I am the owner," he declared, crossing his arms. "And I assure you, our reputation is just fine without the need for theatrics." The lobby fell silent. Several patrons and staff had paused to watch the exchange, their curiosity thinly veiled. Olivia took a slow breath, steadying herself. She wasn't about to let his ignorance or prejudice ruin her evening. "Well, Mr. Davenport," she said evenly, "I suggest you reconsider your stance. I dined in some of the finest establishments around the world, and this is the first time I've been turned away without cause." Richard's eyes narrowed, his pride evidently stung. "If you don't leave now, I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." The audacity of his threat left Olivia momentarily speechless. She had experienced bias before, but never so blatantly or publicly. Before she could respond, Richard had already pulled out his phone and dialed. "Yes, this is Richard Davenport, manager of L'Amour," he said into the receiver. "We have an individual here who's refusing to leave. She's causing a disturbance." Olivia folded her arms, refusing to let him intimidate her. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "Call them. I'm not going anywhere." 10 minutes later, the soft wail of sirens pierced the air as a patrol car pulled up outside the restaurant. 2 officers stepped inside, their expressions professional but wary. One of them, a younger officer with bright eyes, froze momentarily when he saw Olivia. "Ms. Adams," he blurted, his voice tinged with disbelief. I didn't expect to see you here." Richard frowned, confusion flashing across his face. "You know her?" The officer turned to his partner, who also appeared startled. "She's Olivia Adams, the founder of Empower Forward." Richard's face drained of color. "Empower Forward," he repeated faintly. I wasn't aware." "That's obvious," Olivia said, her voice sharp. She turned to the officers. "I apologize for the inconvenience, gentlemen. It seems Mr. Davenport called you under false pretenses." The senior officer stepped forward, his tone respectful. "Ms. Adams, we're deeply sorry for this situation. Is there anything we can do to assist you?" Olivia shook her head. "Thank you, but I'll handle it from here." The officers nodded and left without further comment, their departure leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Richard stood frozen, his arrogance now replaced with abject humiliation. I had no idea," he stammered. "Please, Ms. Adams, accept my sincerest apologies." Olivia regarded him coldly. "Your ignorance doesn't excuse your behavior. You judged me without knowing a thing about me, and now you're scrambling to save face because you realized who I am." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Olivia held up a hand. "Save it," she said firmly. "I won't be dining here, and I'll be sharing this experience with my network. Consider this a lesson in humility." Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out, her head held high. As she stepped into the night air, she felt a mix of anger and resolve. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been dismissed or degraded because of someone else's prejudice. Sliding into her car, Olivia took a deep breath. Tonight's events had ignited something in her, a determination to address not just this incident, but the broader culture that allowed such behavior to persist. She smiled faintly, her reflection in the rearview mirror radiating quiet strength. "Richard Davenport," she murmured, "you have no idea what's coming." The plan in motion. The following morning, sunlight streamed through Olivia's penthouse suite at the Grand Meridian Hotel, where she had relocated after the previous evening's debacle. The warmth of the light did little to ease the simmering frustration she felt, but Olivia knew better than to let her emotions dictate her actions. Years of building her empire had taught her the value of strategy and patience. As she sipped her morning coffee, her assistant, Natalie, arrived promptly at 8:00 a.m. Natalie was a petite woman in her early 30s with a razor-sharp mind and an uncanny ability to anticipate Olivia's needs. Her notepad was already open, pen poised, ready to capture every detail of her boss's instructions. "Morning, Natalie," Olivia greeted, her tone brisk but polite. "We've got a lot to tackle today." "Good morning, Ms. Adams," Natalie replied, her professionalism unwavering. "I've already compiled a report on L'Amour and its owner, Richard Davenport. I think you'll find it illuminating." Olivia gestured for Natalie to take a seat as she flipped open the sleek laptop on the glass-topped coffee table. Let's hear it. Natalie began reading from her notes. L'Amour is one of 6 properties owned by Davenport Hospitality Group. The group has been around for about 25 years, with L'Amour being their flagship location. However, their financials are less than stellar. 3 of their properties are operating at a loss, and L'Amour itself is barely breaking even. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Interesting. And the staff? That's where it gets messy. Natalie continued, flipping to another page in her notebook. There are numerous complaints from employees about a toxic work environment, most of which point back to Davenport himself. High turnover rates, reports of racial discrimination, and even a few lawsuits, although it seems they were settled out of court. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The pieces were falling into place. What about their reputation in the industry? Mixed, Natalie replied. The food and ambience are praised, but the management practices have raised eyebrows. It's clear that Davenport relies heavily on his chef and sommelier to keep the place afloat. Without them, the restaurant would likely crumble. A slow smile spread across Olivia's face. Good. Very good. This isn't just about me, Natalie. It's about setting a precedent. Davenport needs to learn that his actions have consequences, and I want to make sure he understands that. Natalie tilted her head, curiosity sparking in her eyes. What's the plan? Olivia leaned forward, her gaze steely. First, I want a private meeting with Davenport. I need to see how he operates when he's cornered. Arrange for it under the guise of a potential business deal. Let's see if he's as arrogant in private as he is in public. Consider it done, Natalie said, jotting down notes. And after that? Olivia's smile widened. After that, we'll see. But I have a feeling he won't like what's coming. Later that day, Olivia sat in her private office overlooking the city skyline. The room was a blend of sleek modernity and warmth, with floor-to-ceiling windows and carefully chosen artwork that reflected her personality. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Natalie entered, her expression a mix of excitement and professionalism. He agreed to the meeting, Natalie announced. Tomorrow afternoon, in one of the private dining rooms at L'Amour. Perfect, Olivia said, standing up and walking to the window. Now comes the hard part. Natalie hesitated, then asked, Do you think he'll even listen? Men like Davenport rarely change. Olivia turned, her eyes thoughtful. He doesn't have to change, Natalie. He just has to learn that his actions have consequences. And if he doesn't, I'll make sure his empire crumbles. The following afternoon, Olivia arrived at L'Amour, dressed in a tailored black suit that exuded authority. As she stepped into the lobby, she noticed Richard Davenport waiting near the entrance to the private dining area. His expression was a mix of curiosity and unease, though he quickly masked it with a forced smile when he saw her. Ms. Adams, he greeted, extending a hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Olivia shook his hand briefly, her grip firm. Let's get straight to the point, Mr. Davenport. I don't appreciate being disrespected, and I certainly don't appreciate having the police called on me for no reason. Richard's smile faltered. I understand, and I sincerely apologize for my behavior. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Olivia's tone was calm but sharp. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Davenport. That was a choice. Richard's face flushed, and he shifted uncomfortably. I realize I made a mistake, and I'd like to make amends. Olivia leaned back in her chair, studying him. And how do you propose to do that? He hesitated, clearly unsure of how to answer. I could offer you a complimentary meal, or perhaps a private event. Olivia's laughter was soft but cutting. A free meal? Do you think that's sufficient to undo the damage you've caused? Not just to me, but to every person you've dismissed or mistreated. Richard's discomfort deepened, and he looked down at his hands. I'm willing to listen to your suggestions, Ms. Adams. Good, Olivia said, her tone firm. Because here's what I want. First, I want a full audit of your hiring practices and employee treatment. Second, I want you to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all your staff, including yourself. And third, I want you to establish a fund to support underprivileged communities, starting with scholarships for culinary students from marginalized backgrounds. Richard's eyes widened. That's a lot to ask. No, Olivia replied coolly. It's the bare minimum. For a moment, Richard seemed ready to argue, but then he sighed, defeated. Fine. I'll do it. Good, Olivia said, standing up. I'll have my legal team draft the necessary documents. You'll have them by the end of the week. Richard stood as well, his expression a mix of relief and resentment. Thank you, Ms. Adams. I appreciate your understanding. Don't thank me, Olivia said, her tone icy. Thank yourself for getting a second chance. As she walked out of the restaurant, Olivia felt a sense of satisfaction, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Davenport had agreed to her terms, but she would ensure he followed through. And if he didn't, she had a backup plan ready. Because Olivia Adams wasn't just a billionaire. She was a force to be reckoned with. An encounter that echoes. As Olivia walked out of the private dining room, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors, a sense of purpose filled her. She glanced back once at the lobby, where the staff avoided eye contact, likely aware of the tense meeting that had just transpired. Olivia's instincts told her that Richard Davenport wasn't entirely sincere. He had agreed to her terms, yes, but his reluctance and underlying resentment were unmistakable. Her driver, Jacob, waited outside in the sleek black car. As Olivia slid into the back seat, he greeted her with his usual professionalism. Meeting go as planned, Ms. Adams. Olivia's lips curved into a faint smile. As planned, not quite, but productive nonetheless. Let's head back to the hotel. I need to make some calls. Jacob nodded, pulling the car smoothly into traffic. The hum of the engine was a soothing counterpoint to the whirlwind of thoughts racing through Olivia's mind. The city outside blurred as her focus sharpened. This wasn't just about teaching Richard a lesson anymore. It was about dismantling the culture of prejudice he represented. Back at the Grand Meridian, Olivia settled into her suite's plush armchair, her laptop open on the glass coffee table in front of her. She quickly dialed a video call to her legal team. Michael Chen, her trusted attorney, appeared on the screen. His glasses glinted in the light of his office, and his expression was focused. As always. Michael, Olivia began, wasting no time. I just left a meeting with Richard Davenport. He's agreed to a series of changes, but I don't trust him to follow through. Michael adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to the camera. What exactly did he agree to? Olivia outlined the terms she had set. The audit, the training programs, and the community fund. Michael listened intently, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he let out a low whistle. That's ambitious, he said, a hint of admiration in his tone. But you're right not to trust him. I can have contracts drafted and ready for his signature by tomorrow. They'll be airtight. I also want monitoring in place, Olivia added. An independent third party to oversee the implementation of these changes. If he tries to backtrack or cut corners, I want to know immediately. Michael made a note on his legal pad. Consider it done. Anything else? Yes, Olivia said, her voice firm. Start discreet inquiries into acquiring his properties. If he fails to meet his commitments, I want to be in a position to take control. Michael raised an eyebrow. You're playing hardball. Olivia leaned forward, her gaze intense. This isn't a game, Michael. This is about setting a precedent. Davenport and people like him need to learn that their actions have consequences. And if he thinks he can placate me with half-hearted efforts, he's sorely mistaken. Michael nodded, his expression serious. Understood. I'll start working on this immediately. The next morning, Olivia met with her trusted assistant, Natalie, and Andrew, her operations manager. The trio convened in Olivia's suite, where she laid out her broader strategy. "We're not just dealing with one man's prejudice," Olivia began, pacing the room. "We're tackling an entrenched culture of discrimination. If we handle this right, we can set an example for the entire hospitality industry." Natalie, ever the pragmatist, asked, "How do we ensure this doesn't just become a one-off story? Something that people forget in a few weeks?" Olivia stopped pacing, her gaze sharp. "We make it impossible to ignore. Natalie, I want you to start reaching out to media outlets, craft a narrative, not about me, but about the broader issue. Focus on the systemic problems and the solutions we're pushing." Andrew leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "And what about Davenport? If the media picks this up, he might double down or retaliate." Olivia smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "That's why we're securing leverage. Michael is already working on contracts and monitoring mechanisms. If Davenport even thinks about backtracking, we'll know." Natalie scribbled furiously in her notebook, then looked up. "And the properties? Are we moving forward with acquisitions?" "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "Quietly, for now. If Davenport refuses to cooperate, or if his business practices don't improve, we'll have the infrastructure ready to step in and replace him." Andrew nodded. "Understood. I'll start scouting potential management candidates, just in case." "Good," Olivia said. "We're not just responding to a single incident. We're laying the groundwork for lasting change." Meanwhile, Richard Davenport sat in his office at Lemoore, staring at the preliminary draft of the contracts Olivia's legal team had sent over. The language was precise and unyielding, leaving no room for evasion or excuses. He felt trapped, cornered by a woman who had turned his own arrogance against him. Richard's assistant, a timid young woman named Claire, knocked hesitantly on his door. "Mr. Davenport, there's a call for you. It's one of the restaurant suppliers." Richard waved her off impatiently. "Take a message." Claire lingered for a moment, then asked softly, "Is everything all right?" "Sir." Richard glared at her, his temper flaring. "Do I look like everything's all right, Claire? Get out and close the door." As she fled the office, Richard leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The walls of his carefully constructed empire were closing in, and for the first time in years, he didn't know how to regain control. That evening, Olivia received an update from Natalie. "The media outreach is going well," Natalie reported. "A few outlets are interested in running features on systemic discrimination in high-end hospitality. They want to include your perspective." "Good," Olivia said. "Coordinate with them, but keep the focus on the larger issue. This isn't about me." Natalie nodded. "Understood." Also, Andrew spoke with a few former employees from Davenport's properties. "Their stories are troubling. We've documented everything." Olivia's expression hardened. "Send the information to Michael. If we need to escalate, I want every piece of evidence ready." As the call ended, Olivia gazed out at the city lights twinkling below. The fight wasn't over, but the tide was turning. She had always believed in the power of resilience and strategy, and now she was putting those beliefs into action. Because this wasn't just about one man or one incident. It was about building a world where people were judged by their character and contributions, not the color of their skin. And Olivia Adams was determined to lead that change, no matter how long it took. The media storm and a brewing resistance. The following week, the story began to ripple through the media landscape, sparked by a well-coordinated campaign. While Olivia had deliberately kept her own name out of the spotlight, her team had carefully highlighted systemic issues in high-end hospitality, using Lemoore as a case study. Former employees anonymously shared their experiences of discrimination, mistreatment, and the toxic culture cultivated under Richard Davenport's leadership. Articles in prominent publications such as the Herald Review and Civic Today painted a picture of an industry that needed reform. Headlines like, "When Luxury Excludes," "Discrimination in High-End Dining," and the untold stories of hospitality workers began circulating on social media. Within days, the hashtags #DineWithDignity and #HospitalityForAll were trending. In his office at L'Amour, Richard sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen highlighting the deep frown etched on his face. Articles about his restaurant, his management practices, and even his personal history were splashed across the internet. Comment sections were brutal, with calls for boycotts and demands for accountability. His phone buzzed incessantly, calls from nervous investors, concerned business partners, and angry patrons. Each call only added to the suffocating pressure bearing down on him. Claire, his assistant, peeked into his office nervously. "Mr. Davenport, there's a reporter from the Civic today here asking for a comment." Richard's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with frustration. "Did I authorize any media interactions, Claire?" "No?" "Then send them away." She flinched at his sharp tone. "Yes, sir. Right away." As Claire left, Richard slammed his fist onto his desk, rattling the glass paperweight perched on the corner. How had it come to this? He had built L'Amour to be a symbol of excellence, a temple of sophistication. And now it was being dismantled, piece by piece, by a woman he had underestimated. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Something had to give. And fast. But what? The contracts Olivia had pushed on him were airtight, leaving him with little room to maneuver. Compliance would mean overhauling his entire business model, a costly and humiliating process. Refusal would mean legal battles, media scrutiny, and potentially losing everything. For the first time in years, Richard Davenport felt powerless. Meanwhile, Olivia and her team were working tirelessly. In the conference room of her foundation's headquarters, she sat at the head of the table, flanked by Natalie, Andrew, and Michael Chen. A large monitor displayed a map of Davenport's properties, along with detailed financials and employee reports. Andrew gestured to one of the locations on the screen. "This one, Soleil's Haven, is bleeding money. Poor management, outdated infrastructure, and dwindling clientele. If we made an offer, they'd probably jump at the chance." Michael nodded. "Agreed. Acquiring it would also give us leverage over Davenport. It's one of his cornerstone properties, despite its poor performance. If we control it, his entire portfolio becomes more vulnerable." Olivia studied the map thoughtfully. "We'll make the offer, but I want the staff there interviewed first. If they face the same issues as L'Amour's employees, I want to know." Natalie chimed in. "I've already reached out to a few former employees from Soleil's Haven. Their stories align with what we've seen at L'Amour: bias, favoritism, and hostile work environments." "Good," Olivia said, her tone decisive. "Once we have enough evidence, we'll approach the current owner. If Davenport's running Soleil's Haven into the ground, they might be eager to sell." Andrew leaned forward, his expression serious. "And what about the media attention?" "It's growing, Olivia. If your name gets tied to this, it could shift the narrative." Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Let it. If the time comes for me to step into the spotlight, I'll be ready. Right now, the focus needs to stay on the issues, not me." That evening, Richard received an unexpected call from one of his oldest friends and occasional investor, Thomas Wainwright. Thomas was a wealthy real estate developer known for his blunt demeanor and sharp business acumen. "Richard," Thomas began without preamble, his voice clipped. "What the hell is going on over there? My inbox is full of messages from journalists asking about our association." Richard sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's a smear campaign, Tom. Some disgruntled employees and a vindictive guest stirring up trouble." "Disgruntled employees don't trend on social media," Thomas shot back. "This is bigger than a few complaints. People are calling for your head, Richard. How are you handling it?" "I'm working on it," Richard said through gritted teeth. "I've already started implementing some changes. Diversity training, new hiring policies. It's all in motion." Thomas snorted. "You better hope it's enough. Because if this doesn't blow over soon, You'll be lucky to have any investors left. Clean up your act, Richard, or I'll be forced to sever ties. I can't afford to be associated with this mess." The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at his phone, the knot in his stomach tightening. Even his allies were abandoning him. At the same time, Olivia received a call from one of the journalists her team had reached out to. It was Emily Larson, a rising star in investigative reporting known for her hard-hitting exposes. "Ms. Adams," Emily began, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity, "I understand you've been working to address discrimination in the hospitality industry. Would you be willing to speak on the record?" Olivia paused, considering. Emily's reputation was stellar, and her reach was extensive. A carefully crafted interview could amplify their efforts exponentially. "I'll agree to an interview," Olivia said finally. "But I have conditions. The focus stays on the broader issue. Not me. I want the spotlight on the voices of those who've been silenced for too long." Emily's respect for Olivia grew in that moment. "Understood. Let's schedule a time. I promise to handle this story with the care it deserves." By the end of the week, Olivia's team had finalized their offer for Solisle's Haven. Michael's legal team had ensured every detail was flawless, and Andrew had already lined up potential candidates to revitalize the property once they took over. Olivia reviewed the documents one last time before signing. "This is just the beginning," she said softly, her determination unwavering. "Davenport won't know what hit him." Across town, Richard sat in his office, drowning in stress and regret. He had no idea that his carefully guarded empire was already crumbling, one strategic move at a time. Unraveling the web. The early morning sun filtered through the windows of Olivia's office, casting long golden rays across the sleek marble floors. Despite the serene setting, the room was a hive of activity. Olivia, Natalie, and Michael Chen were seated at the long conference table, their attention fixed on a screen displaying the final contract for the acquisition of Solisle's Haven, one of Richard Davenport's struggling properties. Michael leaned back in his chair, the light glinting off his glasses as he tapped his pen against the table. "The owner of Solisle's Haven is eager to sell. Davenport doesn't technically own the property. He leases it through his hospitality group. If we acquire it, we not only secure a foothold in his portfolio, but also gain access to staff and operations insights." Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "What's the likelihood of Davenport catching wind of this before we finalize?" "Low," Michael replied confidently. "We've handled this through a third-party LLC, so it won't raise any red flags until the ink is dry." Natalie, always prepared, interjected. "I've also prepared a transition strategy for the property. If the sale goes through, we'll introduce a new management team and rebrand immediately. It'll signal a fresh start for the staff and patrons alike." Olivia glanced at the documents, her mind working through the implications. "Good. But I want to meet with the staff personally once we take over. If Davenport's toxicity seeped into Solisle's Haven, I want to hear their stories firsthand." Natalie scribbled a note. "Understood. I'll arrange it." Michael closed his folder with a satisfied smile. This move will destabilize Davenport's operations. Solisle's Haven has been his stopgap for covering losses elsewhere. Without it, his entire financial structure becomes precarious. Olivia leaned back, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Perfect. Let's proceed." Across town, Richard Davenport's morning was far less tranquil. He sat in his dimly lit office at L'Amour, the blinds drawn tight as he sifted through a stack of financial reports. His mood had darkened further since his terse call with Thomas Wainwright a few days prior. Investors were jittery, staff morale was at an all-time low, and the media storm continued to rage unabated. The knock at his door startled him. Claire peeked inside, her expression anxious. "Mr. Davenport, there's something you need to see." Richard waved her in impatiently. "What is it now?" She handed him a tablet, the screen displaying a breaking news alert from the Civic today. The headline read, "Discrimination and Decay, the Downfall of the Hospitality Empire." Richard's stomach churned as he scanned the article. It detailed the systemic issues within his hospitality group, using interviews with former employees and patrons to paint a damning picture. While the piece didn't explicitly name Olivia Adams, it alluded to a prominent philanthropist spearheading efforts for industry-wide reform. How the hell did this happen? Richard growled, slamming the tablet onto his desk. Who's behind this? Claire shifted uncomfortably. The article doesn't say, but it's clearly someone with influence. Richard clenched his fists, his mind racing. The pieces began to fit together. The mysterious contracts Olivia had forced on him, the sudden media attention, and now this expose. She was behind it. She had to be. "Get me my lawyer," he barked, his voice echoing in the small office. Now. At the same time, Olivia was reviewing the finalized acquisition of Soleil's Haven. The sale had gone through smoothly, thanks to Michael's legal expertise and Natalie's discreet handling of the negotiations. Olivia now owned a piece of Davenport's crumbling empire, and the ripple effect was already being felt. Andrew entered the room, his face a mix of excitement and determination. "We've got another development," he announced. "I just received a tip from one of Davenport's former employees, a manager from one of his properties that shut down last year. They're willing to talk." Olivia's eyebrows lifted. "What do they have?" "Evidence," Andrew replied. "Emails, memos, and meeting notes detailing discriminatory hiring practices, wage suppression, and even incidents of harassment. It's enough to build a legal case against him." Olivia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "This could be the nail in his coffin. Arrange for a meeting. I want to see everything." That afternoon, Olivia met with the former manager, a soft-spoken man named Parker Jones. He had worked under Davenport for nearly a decade before finally resigning out of frustration and exhaustion. Sitting across from Olivia in her conference room, Parker placed a thick folder on the table. "These are copies of everything I managed to keep," Parker said, his voice steady but tinged with bitterness. "I knew I couldn't do much while I worked for him, but now, I just want to make sure people know the truth." Olivia opened the folder, scanning its contents. The documents were damning. Explicit directives to prioritize wealthy, white patrons, memos dismissing concerns about discriminatory treatment, and financial records showing intentional underpayment of certain employees. "This is powerful," Olivia said, her voice calm but resolute. "Thank you for coming forward, Parker. Your courage will make a difference." Parker nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "I just want to see justice done." While Olivia and her team were gathering momentum, Richard was desperately trying to regain control. He had called an emergency meeting with his legal team and PR consultants, who had been scrambling to mitigate the damage. "We need a statement," one of the PR consultants suggested, "something that acknowledges the concerns and promises change." Richard scoffed. "A statement? That's your solution. Words won't fix this mess." Another consultant chimed in. "What about a public apology? If you admit to mistakes and outline a plan for reform, it might buy you some goodwill." Richard shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I'm not admitting anything. That would be like pouring gasoline on the fire." His lawyer, a stern man in his 60s, finally spoke up. "Richard, you're running out of options. If this continues, you won't just lose your reputation. You'll lose your business." For a moment, Richard considered the weight of those words. But his pride refused to let him accept defeat. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not going down without a fight." The fight, however, was already slipping out of his hands. By the end of the week, Olivia's acquisition of Soleil's Haven was public knowledge. The rebranding effort had begun, and the staff were already speaking out about the improved working conditions under the new management. Richard watched the news coverage in silence, the realization dawning on him. Olivia Adams wasn't just trying to teach him a lesson. She was dismantling everything he had built. And she wasn't done yet. The pressure mounts. As the week progressed, Olivia's calculated moves began to show results. The rebranding of Soleil's Haven as Haven Nouveau was met with an overwhelmingly positive response. The new management team, personally selected by Olivia and Andrew, implemented immediate changes that resonated with both staff and customers. Employee testimonials praising the new work environment went viral on social media, further highlighting the stark contrast between Olivia's leadership style and Richard Davenport's toxic practices. Meanwhile, Davenport's empire was visibly cracking. The media frenzy surrounding the exposé in the Civic today was only growing, fueled by stories of staff abuse and patron discrimination. Former employees were stepping forward with their own accounts, bolstered by Olivia's quiet but firm encouragement and the support of her legal team. Richard Davenport's breaking point. In the sterile confines of his office, Richard sat slumped in his chair, his head resting in his hands. The once proud manager who had strutted through the halls of his flagship restaurant now looked like a shadow of his former self. The stack of legal notices and angry investor emails on his desk was growing by the hour. Claire entered cautiously, holding a folder. "Mr. Davenport," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You should see this." "What now?" he barked, though his voice lacked its usual edge. She placed the folder on his desk and opened it to reveal the latest financial report for L'Amour. The numbers were stark. Reservations had plummeted by nearly 40% in the last week, and several high-profile events had been canceled. The restaurant's once sterling reputation was in free fall. "We've lost 3 major investors this morning," Claire continued, hesitating before adding, and Chef Laurent handed in his resignation. Richard's head shot up. "What? Laurent quit?" Claire nodded, her face pale. "He said he couldn't be part of a business that treated people the way you do. He's already accepted an offer from Haven Nouveau." Richard's vision blurred with anger. Chef Laurent had been the cornerstone of L'Amour's success, his reputation alone drawing patrons from across the country. Losing him to Olivia's new venture felt like the ultimate betrayal. "Get me a meeting with Laurent," Richard demanded. "I'll talk him into staying." "He was clear, sir," Claire said softly. "He doesn't want to come back." Richard's hands clenched into fists. Everything he had worked for was slipping away, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to stop it. Olivia's next move. In the sleek boardroom of Empower Forward's headquarters, Olivia met with her core team to discuss the next phase of their plan. Andrew, Natalie, and Michael sat around the table, their faces alight with anticipation. Andrew began, gesturing to a series of charts displayed on the monitor. Haven Nouveau's success is already making waves. Employees from Davenport's other properties have reached out, asking if we plan to expand. They're desperate for change. Natalie added, "The media coverage is shifting in our favor. Even outlets that were initially hesitant are now picking up the story. People are demanding accountability, not just from Davenport but from the entire industry." Michael leaned forward, his tone measured but firm. "The evidence Parker Jones provided is more than enough to build a legal case against Davenport. If we move forward with a lawsuit, it could force his entire operation into bankruptcy." Olivia listened intently, her mind weighing the options. Finally, she spoke. "We'll move forward, but carefully. The goal isn't just to take Davenport down. It's to set a precedent for the industry. I want this lawsuit to shine a spotlight on the systemic issues and push for widespread reform." Michael nodded. "Understood. I'll start drafting the filings." Olivia turned to Andrew. "What's the status of the other properties in Davenport's portfolio?" Andrew smiled. "We've identified 2 more that are primed for acquisition. Their owners are open to offers, and the staff are eager for new management." "Good," Olivia said, her voice calm but resolute. "Let's proceed. The more we chip away at Davenport's empire, the more leverage we gain." A public showdown. Days later, Richard received a summons for a public hearing initiated by Olivia's legal team. The hearing, scheduled to address labor violations and discriminatory practices, was a media spectacle before it even began. Journalists and activists gathered outside the courthouse, eager for a glimpse of the high-stakes showdown. On the day of the hearing, Olivia arrived with her team, her calm demeanor exuding quiet confidence. She wore a navy blue suit, understated yet commanding, and greeted the press with grace, refusing to be drawn into sensationalism. Richard, on the other hand, arrived looking haggard. His once pristine suit was wrinkled, and the dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. The glare of cameras and the buzz of reporters only deepened his scowl. Inside the packed courtroom, the proceedings began with testimony from former employees. Parker Jones was among the first to speak, recounting years of mistreatment and discriminatory policies with a calm but firm voice. His words painted a damning portrait of Davenport's management style, leaving the audience in stunned silence. Next came testimonials from current and former patrons who had experienced or witnessed bias at L'Amour and its sister establishments. Each story chipped away at Richard's defenses, exposing the rot at the core of his empire. When it was Olivia's turn to speak, she addressed the court with her characteristic poise. "This case is not just about one man or one business," she began. "It's about the systemic inequalities that persist in industries built on the principle of hospitality. If we allow these practices to continue unchecked, we fail not only the employees who work tirelessly, but also the patrons who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect." Her words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the audience. A crumbling empire. By the end of the hearing, the court ruled in favor of Olivia's case, ordering Davenport to pay substantial damages and comply with strict oversight of his remaining properties. The financial blow, combined with the ongoing media scrutiny, was too much for his hospitality group to bear. Within weeks, Davenport was forced to file for bankruptcy, his once proud empire reduced to ruins. Olivia, meanwhile, continued her mission. The acquisition of Davenport's properties wasn't about expanding her portfolio. It was about proving that fairness, respect, and inclusivity could coexist with success. Under her leadership, the newly rebranded establishments thrived, becoming models for ethical business practices in the hospitality industry. The legacy of change. Months later, as Olivia sat in her office overlooking the city skyline, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The fight against Richard Davenport had been grueling, but it had also been necessary. It wasn't just about one man's downfall. It was about paving the way for a better future. Natalie entered the room with a smile. "The latest reports are in. Haven Nouveau and the other properties are setting new records for employee satisfaction and customer loyalty." Olivia smiled, a sense of satisfaction washing over her. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Because for Olivia Adams, the fight was never just about winning. It was about building a world where everyone had a seat at the table, and she wasn't done yet. Rise from ruins. Months after the courtroom battle that dismantled Richard Davenport's empire, the hospitality industry was still grappling with the shockwaves of Olivia Adams' strategic campaign. News outlets continued to dissect the fallout, highlighting not only Davenport's failures, but also Olivia's transformative efforts to rebuild and reform the industry. Davenport's descent. Richard sat alone in the corner of a dimly lit cafe, a stark departure from the lavish surroundings he once frequented. His once polished appearance had been replaced by a disheveled look, his hair unkempt, his suit rumpled, and his confidence all but eroded. A stack of unopened letters lay on the table before him, each one a stark reminder of his downfall. Lawsuits, debt collections, and official notices from former investors demanding repayment. The cafe television flickered with a breaking news segment. The screen displayed Olivia Adams standing in front of one of her newly rebranded properties, cutting a ribbon alongside smiling staff and community members. The headline read, "Rebuilding Hospitality, Olivia Adams' Vision for Inclusive Excellence." Richard's jaw tightened as he watched, a bitter taste rising in his throat. The success that had eluded him was now firmly in Olivia's grasp. She had taken what he had built, his properties, his patrons, even his staff, and transformed them into symbols of everything he had failed to achieve. He looked down at his hands, trembling slightly as he clutched his coffee cup. It wasn't just his business that he had lost. His reputation, his connections, and even his sense of identity had crumbled under the weight of his arrogance. For the first time in years, Richard felt something foreign: regret. Olivia's expansion. At the same time, Olivia stood in the grand lobby of Haven Nouveau, overseeing the final preparations for its grand reopening gala. The space had been completely transformed, its once-dated decor replaced with sleek, modern designs that celebrated inclusivity and innovation. Art from diverse, local creators adorned the walls, and the menu featured dishes crafted by chefs from underrepresented backgrounds. Andrew approached her, a clipboard in hand and a satisfied smile on his face. Everything's set for tonight. The guest list is packed. Media outlets, industry leaders, even a few former critics. This is going to be big. Olivia nodded, her gaze sweeping over the bustling staff, who moved with purpose and joy. It's not just about tonight, she said. It's about proving that we can do better, every day, for every person who walks through those doors. Andrew chuckled. You're about to give another speech, aren't you? She smiled. You know me too well. Before Olivia could say more, Natalie appeared, her phone in hand. Olivia, you're going to want to see this. Natalie handed Olivia the phone, which displayed an article from the Business Ledger. The headline read, Davenport Speaks. A fallen titan reflects on his mistakes. Curious, Olivia opened the article. It was an interview with Richard Davenport himself, conducted by a smaller independent outlet. In it, he admitted to his failures, acknowledging the toxic environment he had created and expressing a desire to make amends. He's reaching out, Natalie said quietly. Trying to save face, maybe. Or maybe it's genuine. Olivia set the phone down, her expression unreadable. People rarely change overnight, she said, but if he's serious about making amends, there may be a path forward for him. The grand reopening. That evening, Haven Nouveau was alive with energy. Guests in elegant attire mingled in the lobby, sipping champagne and marveling at the transformation. Reporters snapped photos, capturing the essence of a business reborn. The air buzzed with excitement, and Olivia stood at the heart of it all, her calm presence commanding attention. When it was time for her speech, the room fell silent. Olivia stepped up to the podium, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the crowd. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began. This isn't just a celebration of Haven Nouveau's reopening. It's a celebration of what's possible when we choose progress over prejudice, collaboration over competition, and kindness over arrogance. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. In rebuilding this space, we didn't just want to create another fine dining experience. We wanted to create a place where everyone feels valued, where diversity is not just acknowledged but celebrated, where respect is not just a policy but a practice. The room erupted into applause, and Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This was what she had worked for, not just to right a wrong but to set a new standard. An unexpected visitor. As the gala wound down, Olivia was approached by a figure she hadn't expected to see. Richard Davenport stood near the edge of the room, his posture hesitant and his expression subdued. Gone was the swagger that had defined him. In its place was a man humbled by his failures. Ms. Adams, he said, his voice low but steady. May I have a word? Olivia studied him for a moment before nodding. Of course. They stepped into a quieter corner of the room, away from the crowd. Richard hesitated, as though searching for the right words, before finally speaking. I'd spent the past few months reflecting on everything, he began. I was wrong. About so many things. The way I treated people. The way I ran my business. It was all driven by ego and fear, and I see now how much damage I caused. Olivia remained silent, her expression neutral, as he continued. I know I can't undo the harm I've done, Richard said, but I want to try to make things right. If there's any way I can help, I'm willing to do it. For a moment, Olivia said nothing. She could sense the sincerity in his voice, but she also knew that words were easy. Actions mattered more. "Helping isn't about restoring your reputation," she said finally. "It's about showing up for the people you've hurt and the communities you've neglected. If you're serious, there's work to be done, but it won't be easy." Richard nodded, his expression solemn. "I understand. I'm ready to do the work." Olivia regarded him for a long moment before extending her hand. "Then let's see what you can do." As they shook hands, the weight of the moment was not lost on either of them. For Richard, it was a chance at redemption. For Olivia, it was a reminder that even the most broken systems and people could be rebuilt with the right foundation. A new chapter. In the weeks that followed, Richard began working under Olivia's guidance, volunteering at the very properties he had once mismanaged. He listened to employees' stories, learned from their experiences, and slowly began to understand the impact of his actions. For Olivia, it wasn't about forgiving or forgetting. It was about fostering growth and accountability. And as her rebranded properties continued to thrive, they became more than just successful businesses. They became symbols of what was possible when empathy, equity, and excellence came together. And for the hospitality industry, they marked the beginning of a new era, one where everyone, no matter their background, had a seat at the table. The ripple effect. The hospitality industry had been forever changed. Olivia Adams' transformation of Richard Davenport's crumbling empire had sparked a movement that transcended the walls of her rebranded properties. Her vision of equitable, inclusive, and thriving spaces resonated far beyond Haven Nouveau, setting a new standard that competitors now race to emulate. A global shift. The success of Haven Nouveau and Olivia's other ventures created waves across the industry. Articles, interviews, and social media posts praised the initiative, with headlines such as "The Woman Who Redefined Hospitality" and "From Chaos to Community." The Olivia Adams Effect. Major corporations, once resistant to change, began implementing reforms to avoid the backlash that had toppled Davenport. Industry conferences dedicated panels to discussing equity in hospitality, with Olivia as the keynote speaker. Her speeches were both inspiring and unflinchingly honest, challenging her peers to dismantle systems of bias and create spaces that truly welcomed everyone. "Excellence is born from diversity," she declared at one such event. "When we bring together people of different backgrounds, perspectives, and talents, we don't just create businesses, we create communities." Her words were met with standing ovations, and many in the audience left inspired to follow her example. Davenport's redemption in progress. Richard Davenport's journey toward redemption was slow but sincere. Under Olivia's mentorship, he took on a humble role at Haven Nouveau, not as a decision-maker, but as a listener. He spent hours each day shadowing the staff, from servers and cooks to janitors, learning the intricacies of the jobs he had once dismissed as beneath him. One day, he found himself in the kitchen during a busy dinner service, observing Chef Laurent, a man who had once been the cornerstone of his own success. "Chef," Richard began hesitantly, "I owe you an apology. I took you for granted, and I created an environment that stifled your creativity. I'm sorry." Chef Laurent paused, turning to face him. His expression was unreadable as he studied Richard. Finally, he nodded. "It's a start," he said before returning to his work. Richard understood that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, and he didn't expect it to. But each small step forward felt like progress. A milestone celebration. Months later, Olivia hosted a gala to celebrate the one-year anniversary of Haven Nouveau's rebranding. The event wasn't just a celebration of her success. It was a tribute to the people who had made it possible. The employees, the patrons, and the communities that had embraced her vision. The grand ballroom was filled with guests from all walks of life, a testament to the inclusivity Olivia championed. Local artists performed, and chefs from diverse backgrounds presented dishes that told their stories. The atmosphere was one of joy and camaraderie, with no barriers between guests, staff, and management. Toward the end of the evening, Olivia took the stage to deliver a speech. The room fell silent as she began. "When we started this journey, it wasn't just about fixing what was broken," she said. "It was about building something better, something stronger. Tonight, we're not just celebrating Haven Nouveau. We're celebrating the power of community, the strength of resilience, and the beauty of change." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "But this is just the beginning. True change isn't a destination, it's a journey. And together, we'll keep moving forward." The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that lasted long after Olivia left the stage. The unexpected ally. As the gala wound down, Richard approached Olivia. He wore a modest suit, a far cry from the tailored ensembles he had once flaunted. His expression was one of quiet gratitude. "Ms. Adams," he said, his voice steady, "thank you for giving me this chance. I don't deserve it, but I'm trying to earn it." Olivia studied him for a moment before responding. "You're making progress, Richard. But remember, this isn't about redemption for you. It's about justice for the people you've hurt." "I know," Richard said, "and I want to do more. If there's anything else I can do to support this mission, I'm ready." Olivia's eyes softened. "Then use your experience to help others. Mentor young entrepreneurs. Teach them what not to do. If you truly want to make amends, start there." Richard nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He left the gala with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to turn his mistakes into lessons that could help others. A legacy of impact. Years later, Olivia stood on a stage once more, this time accepting an award for her contributions to the hospitality industry. The audience was filled with familiar faces, former employees who had become leaders, competitors who had been inspired by her work, and community members whose lives had been touched by her efforts. In her acceptance speech, Olivia reflected on the journey. "When I began this work, it wasn't about awards or recognition," she said. "It was about creating a world where everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from, feels valued. That's a legacy worth building. And it's a legacy we're all responsible for continuing." The applause that followed was heartfelt, a culmination of years of hard work and determination. The final chapter. As Olivia left the event, she paused outside the venue, looking up at the night sky. The stars above sparkled, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the small but meaningful role she played within it. Jacob, her loyal driver, opened the car door for her. "Another successful night, Ms. Adams." Olivia smiled. "Another step forward, Jacob. Always forward." As the car glided into the night, Olivia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road ahead would have its challenges, but she was ready for them. After all, she had proven time and again that change was not only possible, it was inevitable. And with every challenge she faced, she knew she would continue to build a world where everyone had a place at the table.